rehousing, yeah. So do they fall in the same 5 categories that the alderman was talking about?
Yes, they do. I would say, yes, they do. I would say, one is at risk of being homeless. The other one is homeless, although they're I call it couch surfing. They're living from one family member or friend to friend house. And the third would be chronically homeless. And that's because they're living, in the parks, in the tents, on the trains, the buses, under the bylaws, etc. So yes, that's the population I work with, and
So they have those problems that he was outlining, that they have mental illness or...
I was gonna say, they have all the social ills and social barriers that exist in the world. Yes, they do. See, I work for rapid rehousing, it's called Housing First. So HUD has decided to say housing first. No matter what their social ills are, put them in an apartment, and then your case management comes in and try to help them work on these social ills. And I just think it's not enough time. I just think the funding needs to be there to make it permanent housing. And that's no other way around it. We need permanent housing. We need funds for permanent housing, not temporary housing, So, yes.
I'd like to ask anybody on the panel. A little closer. Okay, anybody on the panel. Since COVID, we've closed thousands of restaurants in the city. We've closed a lot of small businesses. We've lost some NOAA housing because of increased property taxes, okay? What kind of property tax structure should we have if we want to bring back some old retail strips? We want to bring back some restaurants. We want to increase the number of NOAA housing units. It seems like the property tax structure is adversely affecting some of the public policy goals that we have for this city.
I have a lot to say.
My answer is just very quick, and that is what you're describing is very complex. And what I've learned as an alderman was that for every good thing I do, I need to be aware of any possible negative repercussions. And so the very best way a good decision can be made on such a very complex issue is you must get different people with all different sets of expertise who disagree with one another in the room so that they can explore the answers to these very complex questions that you have.
I will also try to keep this quick, and if you do a whole other session on this, I will come to that for sure. There's two challenges, I think, with the property tax, the way we have property tax in Chicago. One is that we have a very high reliance on the property tax. Again, it's mostly because of pension. It's a very stable source of revenue, right? The city says, all the taxing needs, bodies say, I want X $million, and they get it. They don't have to worry about fluctuation in the market. So that, I think, over time, if you have a structural way of shifting off of that property tax, I think it helps. And then on top of that is the way we have it split. So it's called classification is what the ordinance is referred to at the county level that says commercial property is assessed at 25% and residential is at 10%. The reason that we have that 2.5 times difference is because the Constitution of the state says you can classify property up to a maximum of 2.5 times difference. And the state says, okay, county, you can do it, and the county said, we're gonna take it all away. To the alderman's point, it's very complex. Though if you push one lever on a property tax system, because we have classification, it's not a one-to-one shift on everybody else. It kind of goes through this whole process with the equalizer that tries to account for the fact that we have classification and nobody else in the state does. But our view on that is that, at least in our market, we hear that among a lot of markets, certainly commercial, but at least in our market, it feels very much like you've now hit the point where that classification is costing the public money, right? You're losing investment, that there's some sort of a bell curve there, that if you reduced that, that disparity a little bit, you would get more commercial investment, and it's still subsidizing everybody else. So at the end of the day, that's your only path to a more sustainable property tax burden on residential property as well, because the path we're going right now, nobody's happy with property taxes, obviously. It's not gonna get any better, they're only gonna go up. So what that number is, I have no idea. That our view is that that's a math problem, and you should get folks in a room who understand that math and make it fluid. It's so difficult to do anything right now because the county says, well, it can be up, the Constitution says it can be all the way, and anytime anybody would want to change it, you're technically in the short term pushing property tax onto residential voters, right? So it's become this sort of sacrosanct, nobody ever touched that, kind of like the RLTO that both of you talk about. But our view is that should just be a math problem, and every 3 years or at every interval, they say, okay, what's the state of the market, and let's tweak it a little bit and try and kind of find that optimum. So again, happy to talk about that later.
Well, if it is so complex, okay, and it's difficult to change, and if you change one part, it adversely affects another part, what are some reasonable alternatives to taxing people? I look at those 5 plastic bottles up there, and I don't know why we don't tax those plastic bottles. And I get a lot of services at my house. I don't pay any taxes on services. Here we're going to increase property taxes, have a damaging effect on our job base, have a damaging effect on our neighborhood retail districts, and there are alternatives. There are other ways to finance this. Why don't we do that?
Let me make a quick comment. I'm taking note of that. One of the purposes of our breakout groups is to come up with questions for further forums. So I'm making a note of that.
So I worked for the city for 12 years. I get a pension. I get a really good pension. And the elephant in the room is our pensions. It's unsustainable. It really is. And so we need to do some really radical things about addressing pensions. Because if you don't work for the government, you don't get a pension. But I do. It's just not sustainable. It's a pyramid scheme. I brought this up before, but anyone who really pushes it is not going to get elected again.
Especially with Alderman Raisins.
Okay, 2 more questions, okay? 2 more questions, and then we get a better breakout.
Thanks. Thank you all. This was really, really great. And I was very troubled by this section on unintended consequences because, it's going to impact everyone. And so everyone agrees this is a serious issue, but I think what troubled me the most is the lack of the pre-planning, like really analyzing the unintended consequences. And, I really think one of the problems is poor planning, lack of accountability and waste. So the migrant crisis has really been shining a light on some of that. And recent reports say that, the city has hired some non-local provider for security and healthcare for the migrants who are being paid astronomical salaries. One example, probably an extreme, was that one nurse was paid a monthly amount that would amount in a total year of $830,000. So when Mayor Johnson has been asked for further information, and he claims that he inherited this contract, he says, no, too burdensome to give the people that information. So my question is there anything in the resolution that will go to the voters, likely go to the voters, that will impose some measures of accountability to make sure that we know how money is being spent? We all agree it's an issue, but the worst thing that can happen is what has been happening in Chicago for decades, which is waste and no accountability by our government and our servants who should be fiscally responsible. So I'm just curious if anything has been sort of baked into this discussion about accountability.
Can I just piggyback on that? That's the issue of the advisory board, setting metrics and monitoring with community engagement and so on. So I'm wondering if that's something that's viable, is that a good way to do that kind of accounting? And I think that's also a work in progress. That's probably not the final draft of the ordinance.
It's not in the referendum question. That's really just about the increase, and I believe it has language about, I don't, segregating might be too strong a word, but separating the funding goes into a fund that is for this broad purpose. I think the part of the challenge is $100 million can go like nothing. I mean, that contract is a good example if you're not really deliberate about what are we doing, and that's part of our concern over the model of having an advisory board that's determining the metrics that are afterwards, is that this is not a new problem, right? I mean, it really, you have enough people that know how to fix this. There are enough experts that, you don't need that necessarily, right? It's good to have external accountability, but you don't need an external ongoing process to figure out what is the plan, in our view. Again, we're not housing experts, but that's part of our concern, is that we would think that in this case you could do that up front, have the plan, have it baked, and have everybody kind of locked in, this is what we're doing. And from there, obviously, you can still have advisory structures and amend things as you go, as you need to.
Two more questions, hope they're quick comments.
Two comments more than questions. One, commercial real estate is in a free fall. I know that you explained a lot of it, but I do know that they need to refinance every 3 to 5 years, not like 30-year mortgages like we have. They're not going to be able to sustain their viability downtown. So they're going to put in a tax that is not going to work. It's just going to collapse because there won't be the money to do this. They haven't thought about this very well. I do think that they need to find out the money they need, find out the solutions and how they're going to use them, and then come up with a plan about how that money comes across the board. This is not a sustainable plan. Second of all, to piggyback on what you said, the city is never responsible with money. Had they been responsible with money, the pensions wouldn't be in trouble. They didn't put their fair share in for years and years and years. They made promises that cannot be kept now because they did not do what they were supposed to then. So the only way to change that is to have the new people coming in, go into private IRAs and things like that, but that has to be a slow changeover because the older people that are depending on what they earned should not be penalized, and that should always be grandfathered in. They got $2 billion in COVID money. Mayor Lightfoot pissed that away just as she felt. Nothing was accountable about that. Nothing is accountable with the migrant money. So until they learn how to manage the money they have, why would we ever allow them to take more?
Very good.
So I hear a lot of people saying, like, where's the plan? Have you heard of a single city, municipality, anything that has solved homelessness? Solving these kind of large problems are a huge multi-project, multi-institutional thing that we need to solve. And so these are things that require iteration and evolution and adaptability. The way that this is phrased gives the advisory board that agility, that advisory, that to adapt to finding the things that work and the things that don't. And so that's the thing, is like, you're talking about needing a plan, but there is no plan because nobody's fixed this yet. There are steps that work for 2 years. There are things that work for like the 6 months. There are some people that succeed in those systems that exist, and there are people who are never going to succeed in the systems that exist. So we need to, this bill works in a way because it allows that agility. I understand your market's it's a mess right now, and that's not this tax's fault, but it's probably not gonna help. I hear that. But like, that's something that I think is not a reason to say that we shouldn't find money for this. So I guess, I'm just saying, like, to go demanding a plan, and a plan can't exist.
I want to make a comment, and this should be your last one before.
So I do want to just, I want to make sure that our position is being clear. it's not that you, sure. When I talk about not having a plan, it's not that you have to pick one thing and then that's it, right? You're locked in. As I was saying earlier, with anything, you have to have some ability to iterate and adapt to change, certainly in the landscape of public policy. Part of what we're really concerned about is the lack of input from other stakeholders that you have to address the problem. So part of it is, there's no acknowledgement of CHA's role in this, right? You were getting other funding streams. As I mentioned, there's no inclusion on, there's no component about market rate housing. We have a housing shortage, period, including market rate, and the impact of that is also to increase, right, the cost of all housing, which is not helping the problem. So I don't want to suggest that when I say that there's no plan, that we want to see more of a plan, that there is only one thing and it has to be locked in. It's more that the starting point is, it should be much better, and that we have the capacity to be much better at the starting point. And then our perspective is, and again, it's not that we shouldn't fund it, it's not clear what you're funding and how much do you need, right? So you can say we need to iterate, but where did you come up with 100 million? Like, what is that gonna get? It might be 500 million. And we might have enough people that when you sit in the room and say, this is the starting point and it's 500 million, then you have to sit down and say, okay, well, how are we gonna come up with 500 million? I think of this as a unique opportunity to do that because it is a public policy problem. I don't think anybody disagrees is a crisis. And so how often do you hear business organizations say, let's all sit down together and talk about taxes that we can raise? I mean, my former boss, Ron Manuel, used to always be quoted as saying, don't let a crisis go to waste. And I really think this is, you have a unique opportunity, and it just seems like we're missing it right now. Anyway.
I'm thinking of, first off, this whole issue of homelessness. This is something that it's an issue across this planet, and no city can expect to solve it. But we have to keep working on it. I am thrilled about the $60 million that HUD gave us, and that we're using that to do a deep dive analysis to really figure out what specific interventions work, so that we can focus our energy on, and time and money on those things that work. And I believe we're going in that direction. I believe also artificial intelligence. There's a nightmare about it, but it can also help look at all the different variables in place so that we can make wiser decisions. So I'm excited that we are going in the direction of solving some very complex issues. I will speak now as a former alderman. When very complex issues came across me in various committees, we first explored the extent of the problem, and then we came up with what the costs were, and that went to the Finance Budget Committee, and then we looked at how we were going to raise that revenue. So that's some concerns. I think this is a crisis that we cannot let go to waste, and so we'll have to figure it out, because the reality is we're wasting money when people are living on the streets. Thank you.
I want to ask Mr. Cappleman something. So you said the $60 million that HUD has given, is this to work on, to dig deeper and work on the solution of homelessness? Was this part of the funding we are getting to house the homeless? The $60 million you mentioned.
So all Chicago received these funds, and they committed goals on how to use this $60 million.
Okay.
And a large part of this, and one of their first #1 priority goal is to do this deep dive analysis to see what works. We know from what the federal government, the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, housing first model is the way to go. especially for people who have a substance use disorder with severe mental illness. You want to house them first. We know that, but we also know that this Housing First model is very expensive, and Heartland Alliance is in deep trouble with their affordable housing that they've lost.
Right.
And so we have to explore what happened that Heartland Alliance is losing all this money, and they have a building in my ward, 50 units of housing for people who have a chronic mental illness and an active substance use disorder. If these people don't have housing, they will live on the streets. So we need to learn from that so that we can come up with some solutions to create more of this type of housing. And it's extraordinarily complex. The cup is half full, not half empty for me. I think we can come up with the answers, but it's going to take all of us working together, stopping the pointing of fingers and the judgmental attitudes that we have. We have to really hear one another.
The reason I was asking, because the program I do work for is funded from all Chicago, direct rehousing, housing first model. But my take on that is housing first model, but the mandated services that we offer, the clients do not have to access them. They don't have to utilize them. That's what's not working. And I can say that because I work with them every day. I house them every day. And I know, if you want to talk about what don't work, that's not working.
How do you fix it?
It need to be mandated. Believe me, if it's mandated, they will apply themselves, period. They will. You know, but this housing first model, I don't know who came up with it, who made it, whatever. HUD or the policy makers. I work it, but honestly, I don't know if I should say this. I don't really. Oh, Lord. It's not working. I'm gonna be honest with myself. It's not working. Housing first is not working. That's all I'm gonna say.
Without the mandate.
Right.
Yes. So let's explore. That's what I'm saying.
On that note,
Thank you. We can
I
come up.
want to recapitulate that and transition to the room.
Okay.
That is,
I really.
Robin raised a really